What is sociology? Sociology is one of the social sciences, disciplines that examine the human or social world. The social sciences are interested in understanding the social world in the same way that the natural sciences are interested in understanding the natural or physical world. Social scientists and natural scientists even use many of the same research methods, including the scientific method. Social scientists employ many different kinds of research methods, which we'll learn about in Chapter 2. Sociology and the social sciences include economics, psychology, geography, communication studies, anthropology, history, and political science. Sociology, the study of society. According to Howard Becker, sociology is the study of people doing things together, because neither the individual nor society exist independently of one another. Human beings are social beings. Without the contact of other people, we would not be unique individuals that we are. Howard Becker famously studied the unwritten rules of jazz musicians that allows musicians who have never met before to jump on stage and perform well together. Sociologists are interested in all aspects of society, a group of people who shape their lives in pattern ways that distinguish their groups from other groups. Sociology looks at a broad range of institutions, structures in our society like education, economics, and politics, to better understand social relationships. Sociology can help you develop a sociological perspective, a way of looking at the world through a sociological lens. Sociologists have developed several approaches for developing a sociological perspective: the beginner's mind, culture shock, and sociological imagination. Just as it sounds, the beginner's mind is the opposite of an expert's mind. Bernard McGrain says that to explore the social world, it is important that we clear our minds of stereotypes, expectations, and opinions so that we are more receptive to our experiences. Borrowing from the Zen Buddhist tradition, McGrain believes that true learning occurs when we quiet our own mental chatter. Then we can see in a new way. Culture shock is a sense of disorientation you experience upon entering a new environment. Behaviors that are typical in one society or culture may seem very strange in another context. Additionally, people might experience culture shock, extreme disorientation, when they exit certain institutions, graduating high school or college, soldiers returning from war or leaving active duty altogether, prisoners returning to society after decades of imprisonment, or retiring from a job that you've held for decades. Sociological imagination is a term coined by C. Wright Mills. Mills says, to understand social life, we must understand the intersection between biography and history. Sociological imagination is a quality of the mind that allows us to understand the relationship between a particular situation in life and what is happening at a social level. This is the intersection of biography and society, social structure, and historical context. Sociologists can use different levels of analysis to explore social relationships. Microsociology examines small group interactions to see how they impact larger institutions in society. Macrosociology examines the large-scale social structures to determine how they impact groups and individuals. A microsociological analysis might look at the relationship between a couple or the interactions of a sports team, or even the short interaction between a cashier and a shopper. A macrosociological analysis might look at the economy and how it impacts consumer behavior, or how a presidential election influenced American morals. This is the micro-macro continuum, and it starts from the large scale, society, and goes down to the individual, the self. Sociological theories. Theories in sociology are propositions that seek to explain the social world and help to make predictions about future events. Theories are also sometimes referred to as approaches, schools of thought, paradigms, or perspectives. Sociological theories typically address social processes at either the microsociological or macrosociological level. This is the sociology's family tree. You will see the roots or the beginnings of sociology in the roots of the tree. And then you will see what led to all the different theories that we have. Auguste Comte stated that sociology needed to be treated like any other scientific discipline. He laid the groundwork for future sociologists and helped to establish the discipline. Auguste Comte was the first thinker to provide a program for the scientific study of society, or a social physics, as he first labeled it. Comte, a French scientist, developed a theory of the progress of human thinking from its early theological and metaphysical stages toward a final positive or scientific stage. Harriet Martineau, a social activist who traveled the United States and wrote about social changes that were radical for this time period. Martineau translated Comte's work into English, making his ideas accessible to England and America. Martineau became a journalist and political economist, proclaiming views that were radical for her time. For example, she supported labor unions, the abolition of slavery, and women's suffrage. Herbert Spencer was the first great English-speaking sociologist. Spencer believed in evolution and coined the phrase, survival of the fittest. He believed that societies evolve through time by adapting to their changing environment. His philosophy is often referred to as social Darwinism. His work was primarily responsible for the establishment of sociology in Britain and America. Although Spencer did not receive academic training, he grew up in a highly individualistic family and was encouraged to think and learn independently. His interest as a young man leaned heavily towards physical science, and instead of attending college, he chose to become a railway engineer. When railway work dried up, Spencer turned to journalism and eventually wrote books including The Study of Sociology in 1873 and The Principles of Sociology in 1897. Like Comte, Emile Durkheim worked to establish sociology as an important academic discipline. Durkheim studied the social factors that bond and hold people together. In Suicide, he studied the relationship between social isolation and suicide at the macro level. In his work, he demonstrated the effectiveness of using scientific, empirical methods to study social reality, essentially completing the project that his countryman Comte had anticipated half a century earlier. In his first major study, The Division of Labor in Society, in 1893, Durkheim expressed his belief that social bonds were present in all types of societies, but that different types of societies created different types of bonds. He suggested that the mechanical solidarity experienced by people in an agrarian society bound them together on the basis of shared tradition and beliefs and similarities of experience. On the other hand, in industrial societies where factory work was becoming increasingly specialized, organic solidarity prevailed. People's bonds with each other were based on the tasks they performed, interdependent, and individual rights. In both cases, people are bound to each other. It is the qualities of the bonds that are different. Durkheim believed that even the most individualistic of actions had sociological explanations, and he set out to establish a scientific methodology for studying these actions. He chose for his groundbreaking case study the most individualistic of actions, suicide, and used statistical data to show that suicides were related to social factors such as religious affiliation, marital status, and employment. Explaining a particular suicide by focusing exclusively on the victim's psychological makeup neglected the impact of social bonds. Karl Marx was a German philosopher and political activist who contributed significantly to sociology's conflict theory. Marx theorized that capitalism created social inequality between the bourgeoisie, who owned the means of production, money, factories, natural resources, and land, and the proletariat, who were the workers. Marx predicted that inequality leads to class conflict. Sociologists have found that Marx's theories continue to provide powerful tools for understanding social phenomena. His idea that conflict between social groups is central to the workings of society and serves as the engine of social change is one of the most vital perspectives in sociology today. Marx noted that a small percentage of the population owned the means of production and thus were able to exploit the masses and thereby ensure greater gains for themselves. This is the basic tenet of capitalism today, and many modern sociologists use Marx's theory to evaluate the contemporary workplace. Max Weber also studied how society was becoming industrialized. He was concerned with the process of rationalization, applying economic logic to all human activity. He believed that contemporary life was filled with disenchantment, the result of the dehumanizing features of modern societies. Much of Weber's work expressed a pessimistic view of social forces, such as the work ethic, that shape modern life. Like other social theorists of his time, Weber was interested in the shift from a more traditional society to a modern industrial society. Weber proposed that modern industrialized societies were characterized by efficient, goal-oriented, rule-governed bureaucracies. He believed that individual behavior was increasingly driven by bureaucratic goals, which had become more important motivational factors than tradition, values, or emotion. Weber believed that this lifestyle left people trapped by their industrious ways of life in what he called an iron cage of bureaucratic rules, which led to disenchantment. George Herbert Mead studied the connection between thought and action, or between the individual and society. Mead suggested that social processes give meaning to objects in our society. People interact, and meanings come from these interactions. For example, a chair isn't inherently important as an object for sitting, as many of us know. It can also be used for climbing and reaching, for blocking an entrance, or as a weapon against an enemy. But because we interact on a daily basis with others who use chairs more commonly for sitting, we come to accept that this is the meaning of this object. This is a trivial example, but the idea can be applied to lots of other objects in our society. For example, things like flags or religious icons have meanings that we have shaped by social interactions. Mead is a symbolic interactionist. We'll talk more about symbolic interactionism in a minute. Irving Goffman studied how the self is developed through interaction with others in society. Goffman used the term dramaturgy to describe the way people strategically present themselves to others. Goffman found it interesting that a person could act one way in front of his or her parents and yet act totally differently in front of friends. When you think about it, people are usually very adept at recognizing the social situation they are in and acting accordingly. This does suggest, though, that we are always acting. So when you feel you are being your true self, is this really the case? Your book refers to paradigms, or schools of thought. Paradigms are ways of thinking or theoretical umbrellas meant to provide a broad explanation for the way things work. Sometimes the term paradigms, theories, and schools of thought are used interchangeably. These terms are all very abstract to beginning sociological thinkers, so you may want to take a little extra time to emphasize the importance of understanding them. Structural functionalism. Society is viewed as an ordered system of interrelated parts, or structures, which are the social institutions that make up society: family, education, politics, the economy. Each of these different structures meets the needs of society by performing specific functions for the whole system, society. The key word here is function. According to this theory, everything in our society has a function. The main principles of the functionalist paradigm are these. 1. Society is a stable, ordered system of interrelated parts or structures. 2. Each structure has a function that contributes to the continued stability or equilibrium of the whole. Conflict theory sees social conflict as the basis of society and social change. Conflict theory proposes that conflict and tension are basic facts of social life, and suggests that people have disagreements over goals and values, and are involved in struggles over both resources and power. The theory thus focuses on the processes of dominance, competition, upheaval, and social change. The main emphasis are on 1. A materialist view of society, focused on labor practices and economic reality. 2. A critical stance toward existing social arrangements. 3. A dynamic model of historical change in which the transformation of society is inevitable. Symbolic interactionism sees interaction and meaning as central to society and assumes that meanings are not inherent but rather are created through interaction. Symbolic interactionism is America's unique contribution to sociology and has proved to be the most influential perspective of the 20th century. For symbolic interactionists, society is produced and reproduced through our interactions with each other by means of language, and our interpretations of that language. Symbolic interactionism sees face-to-face interaction as the building block of everything else in society, because it is through interaction that we create a meaningful social reality. Here are the 3 basic tenets of symbolic interactionism as laid out by Bloomer in 1969. 1. We act toward things on the basis of their meanings. For example, a tree can provide a shady place to rest, or it can be an obstacle to building a road or home. Each of these meanings suggests a different set of actions, and this is as true for physical objects like trees as it is for people, like mothers or police officers, institutions, church or school, beliefs, honesty or equality, or any social activity. 2. Meanings are not inherent, rather they are negotiated through interaction with others. That is, whether the tree is an obstacle or an oasis is not an intrinsic quality of the tree itself, but rather something that people must determine. The same can mean one thing to one person and something else to another. 3. Meanings can change or be modified through interaction. For example, the contractor who sees the tree as an obstacle might be persuaded to spare it by the neighbor. Now the tree is something to build around rather than bulldoze. Although symbolic interactionism is focused on how both self and society develop through interaction with others, it is useful in explaining and analyzing a wide variety of specific social issues, from inequalities of race and gender to the group dynamics of families and co-workers. Feminist theory looks at both gender inequalities in society and the way that gender structures the social world and considers remedies to these inequalities. There is a link between feminist theory and conflict theory in that both deal with stratification and inequality in society, and both seek not only to understand the inequality, but also to provide remedies for it. Queer theory proposes that categories of sexual identity are social constructs, in that no social category is fundamentally either deviant or normal. Queer theory was inspired by gay and lesbian rights movements in the 70s and 80s. Queer theory, which arose in the late 1980s and early 1990s, proposes that categories of sexuality such as homo, hetero, bi, and trans are social constructs. In other words, no sexual category is fundamentally deviant or normal. We create these meanings socially, which means that we can change these meanings as well. Postmodernist theory suggests that social reality is diverse, pluralistic, and constantly changing. Postmodernism was a reaction to modernism, a paradigm that trusts in the power of science and technology to create progress. In order to understand postmodernism, we must first need to juxtapose it with modernism, the movement against which it was a reaction. Modernism is both a historical period and an ideological stance that began with the 18th century Enlightenment, or Age of Reason. Modernists thought values scientific knowledge, a linear timeline-like view of history, and a belief in the universality of human nature. In postmodernism, on the other hand, there are no absolutes, no claims to truth, reason, right, order, or stability. Everything is therefore relative, fragmented, temporary, or contingent.